Hey folks, tonight we're diving into the miserable, awkward, and totally misunderstood life of a medieval torturer. The only person in history with a steady job, a government paycheck, and zero dinner party invites. So before you get comfy, do me a solid, like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually dig what I'm putting down here. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always cool to see who's tuning in from all corners of the globe. Now, dim those lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some soothing white noise. Let's step together into tonight's little nightmare. You weren't born knowing how to handle chains and tighten screws. Like most medieval kids, you popped out into a cramped little house smelling of wet straw and stinky onions. You're small, quiet, and kind of obsessed with frogs. Nobody thought much of it until you started asking weird questions, while other kids were busy playing wooden swords and pretending to be knights. You were the weirdo picking up dead rats behind the bakery and grilling your parents about how joints work. This kid's got some serious talent. Also, made the local priest really uncomfortable. By age 10, you already knew how to sharpen a knife, not for hunting, just because it made you feel organized. You're not violent. You're curious. And in a medieval village, that's basically a death sentence. You're not from some rich family. Maybe your dad was a butcher or a cooper, someone who dealt with messy, gross stuff regularly. Your mom might have sold herbs or whispered healing secrets that made the neighbors nervous. You're not cursed. You just exist. Then one day, someone offers you a chance. A judge, or maybe the town manager, looks at you small, quiet, observant, and says, "He's not weak." Is he? That's medieval for hey. Want to work for me? Before you know it, you're an apprentice, not to a knight or a blacksmith, but to a man with a vinegar and rust-smelling apron. He doesn't laugh much, doesn't explain much either, just points, expects you to get it, a bench here, a chain there, a bucket with zero instructions. You sweep floors, you clean tools, you're told not to ask what they're for. You get curious, then you learn not to ask anymore. Nights are restless, not from fear, but because your room's right next to a hallway leading downstairs. Creaky stairs, echoing doors. And sometimes you swear you hear whispers that aren't yours. And that's how it all begins. Not with a guilty moment, just a well-behaved kid, a practical town, and a job nobody else wanted. You never officially chose this path. It just kind of happened to you. One day, you're helping mom grind herbs or sweeping behind the tavern. Then you're standing at the edge of town with a small bag of bread, an old cloak, and directions to live with Uncle Grior. Uncle Grior is not your actual uncle. Nobody really knows if he has a family at all. He lives right on the edge of the village. Not far enough to raise suspicion, but far enough that no one passes his door on the way to church. He's got a house with no garden, a locked shed, and a surprisingly huge collection of ropes. You don't ask questions. Rule number 1, Greyor doesn't talk much. He's not cruel, just brutally practical. You show up in the morning to find him sharpening something that definitely isn't kitchenware. He teaches you how to boil water, mix cleaning solutions, and oil gears. Ask what it's for and he just grumbles. Guess right, and he groans louder. Your first week is spent wiping grime off benches, sorting chains by size, and learning to fix wooden cranks without losing a finger. Everything's mechanical. No explanations. No emotional pep talks, just work. At night, Gregor usually sat by the fire with a tin cup, staring into the flames like they held the secrets of the universe. You sat opposite him, trying not to breathe too loud and give away your nerves. Every now and then, he'd hand you a book, not the Bible, something older, smelling like ashes, filled with pages about bone restraint techniques and how much skeletons can put up with. You didn't get all of it. but you knew it was important. Like, don't mess this up important. Once, you tried chatting with a kid your age by the riverbank. The kid asked what you were learning. You said, how to keep stuff from breaking too soon. Then he stopped talking to you altogether. By the end of the first month, you'd nailed 4 different knots, knew how to ID bones by shape, and could clean a heavy metal mask without letting rust crash the party. You weren't being trained for a job. You were being trained to keep your mouth shut. Your real first workday didn't start with any ceremony. No scrolls, no handshakes, no welcome to the Department of Pain. It started with a key, a heavy iron key dropped into your palm with Gregor's low growl. Basement? You know the way, he said, like you were just dying to go there. You crept down the creaky stone steps, torch in one hand, the other trying to keep you from tripping. The air got colder with every step. Not that fresh. Crisp cold you like. More like the kind of cold that seeps into your bones from a forgotten wine cellar, like it's trying to tell you, hey, you might want to rethink this. The room down there wasn't big, but it had plenty of space to be uncomfortable. Low ceiling, walls that never saw sunlight, a worn wooden table right in the middle, polished smooth by centuries of neglect, awkward chit-chat, ropes hanging on hooks that looked more like a creepy coat rack from hell. In the corner, there was a bucket, because there's always a bucket. Gregor didn't explain a thing, just pointed clean it, oil it, and never let the wheel get loose. Last time it slipped, we almost had to get creative. You nodded. You were 15, maybe 16, old enough to know better. So no pretending you didn't get it. You scrubbed without asking what you were even scrubbing. You cleaned the handle and hinges clearly untouched since the last time someone had feelings. That afternoon, someone was brought in. Not you. Not yet. But you were told to stay. Watch and learn how to pace yourself. Apparently, even pain has a rhythm. The man in the chair was silent for a long time. Then he talked way too much. You weren't asked to help, just to keep things tidy. Swap a cloth here. Refill a bottle there. You followed orders, trying not to fixate on anything too specific. When you finished, Gregor handed you a rag and pointed to the floor. Nobody else cleans. He said, that's your welcome gift. Then he sat by the fire, hands still damp and smelling like old iron. Gregor took a sip from his teacup. He didn't say much, not because he was scared, but because he'd figured something out. This job doesn't need questions. It just needs quiet, obedient hands. And his hands, apparently, were perfect for the job. After weeks of successful silence, Gregor gave you what felt like a promotion, your first work outfit. No cloak, no ceremony, just a stiff leather apron, cracked from use, and a pair of gloves that had definitely seen some things. He handed them over without a word, like this was the most normal milestone ever. No fanfare, no warnings, just, you'll need these. Splinters are worse than noise. By the way, you held the gloves like they might bite. The apron was thick, cracked in spots, smelling like boiled vinegar mixed with regret. The gloves were heavier than you expected, reinforced on the fingers, probably to help you handle things you didn't want to touch, but still had to. You put them on, fitting just right. No mask, no hood, and definitely no dramatic silhouette like in the plays. Torturers aren't mysterious. They have faces, and eventually, everyone remembers them. Out in the village, whether you wore protective gear or not didn't really matter. Anyone could spot it. Something in the stance, all alert, a bit hunched, always ready to dodge random accusations or a surprise confession. You could be rocking your Sunday best, and folks still cross the street to avoid eye contact. The gloves become your signature move. You slip them on out of habit, even when sweeping the floor, even while eating. It's not vanity. It's pure convenience. You never know when someone's going to ask you to tighten something or someone. Then there are the boots. Ugly, bulky, made to grip slippery stone floors. Basically, all you need to know about them. Walking in those boots makes a sound. A final, dull thud. People learn to recognize it. Moms grab their kids. Stall vendors suddenly get super busy behind their counters. Ever tried smiling at a girl by the well? She looks you up and down. Gloves. Boots. That usual sharp look of yours. I use grease to oil the sharp tools in my free time, then immediately drop the bucket. The uniform wasn't just leather and laces. It was a warning label. It screamed to the world, this guy's useful, but hands off. And sure enough, that's how they treated you. Once you prove you're useful, can tie knots, follow orders, and don't faint in awkward moments, the town gives you a place to crash. Calling it a home is generous. It's more like a stone rectangle glued to the back of the government building, conveniently close to the dungeon. Close enough to hear everything, like chains moving at night when nobody's supposed to be moving chains. This spot has exactly 2 perks: a locked door and walls thick enough to keep most sounds from crashing into your dreams, most of which smell like, well, something constant, faint, and utterly unpleasant. It smells like someone tried to clean, but gave up halfway. Damp wood, boiled herbs, and some vague metallic whiff you don't ask too many questions about. The first week there, a local priest left a small bag of incense with a note. Please use this. Thoughtful, sure, but also kind of creepy. You're always close to work. Like, tragically close. If a judge needed urgent advice, you're just 15 steps away. No excuses, no days off, just the duty of proximity. Neighbors? Nope. The nearest residents live across the square, and even they won't crack their shutters if they hear your boots. You're your own neighborhood. Just you, the locals, and a family of indifferent crows. You try to make it cozy. Maybe a wooden chair, a blanket, a sad little potted plant wilting under the weight of its surroundings. You once hung a small rug. It fell off the wall after a day. Like the house itself rejected the color. Sleep finally comes fitful, shallow, dreamless. You get used to the rumbling noises, muffled voices, late-night deliveries nobody wants to talk about. You develop a talent for waking up instantly, but never truly resting. It's not haunted. Not exactly. It's just filled with memories, not yours, but someone else's, and they weigh on you silently. Like fog, you just can't shake. Brush it off. Welcome home, theoretically. You're a civil servant. Emphasis on theoretically. The only public thing about you is how people avoid you in public. Folks don't talk to you as much as they do when you're nearby. Like you're a pothole in a conversation they're desperately trying not to fall into. You walk into a tavern, and suddenly the whole table is hypnotized by their breadcrumbs. Kids get hurried inside. Dogs bark at you, then stop. You're not officially banned from events, but somehow you never get invited. Weddings. Oh, those must have gotten lost with the postman's harvest festivals. Oh, we just thought you were busy with your iron things. Your presence, apparently, doesn't mix well with fun. At the market, merchants greet you with the kind of forced politeness reserved for tax collectors and distant relatives. You get served. Sure, but fast, clean, and with a desperate hope that you'll just disappear somewhere else. You pay your coins like everyone else, but the bread's always a bit stale, and the fruit's just a little too tough. Once, in a bold moment, you try to blend in with a bunch of folks near the well. They're laughing, drinking together, swapping stories. You smile and step forward. Just a quick glance at your gloves, clean of blood, barely noticeable, and poof. The conversation evaporates like sugar in warm tea. You stand there, holding your water jug, quietly turning away. Friendship isn't impossible, just really unlikely. The other trades have guilds. Blacksmiths have camaraderie. Even the village drunks have drinking buddies. Then there's Gregor, who once nodded at you and said, "You're less disappointing than most." High praise indeed. No romantic prospects either. If someone looks at you twice, it's probably to make sure they can describe you accurately to the priest later. No love letters come your way. Just scraps slid under your door, saying things like, "Please don't marry my wife. He's innocent." Apparently, mostly anyway. Yet, you're not hated. That implies passion. You're just seen as necessary, but miserable, like damp weather or tax season. You're not part of the village. You're right next to it, standing just outside the circle, waiting to be called in. And most days, you kind of like it that way. Down a narrow corridor behind the town hall, past a wooden door nobody's ever knocked on, is your workspace, lovingly referred to by locals as that place. They never say more than that. No need. It's not just a room, it's a mood. Stone walls, but not smooth. Textured, grooved, stained, with tiny scratches no one admits to noticing. No windows, just one lonely flashlight rack near the entrance and occasional flickers of light that make things worse. No matter how many candles you light, darkness always wins. In the middle, a table, heavy oak, reinforced, strangely sturdy, the kind of furniture that wasn't really built, more like assembled under duress. It's here. Ropes neatly coiled on each corner like stage props. Props waiting for the world's dullest performance. Nearby, a chair not for sitting, just a chair. The walls are covered with tools, each hanging just so, looking like a cursed medieval kitchen. Hooks, clamps, screws. Gear's the classic anxiety toolkit of the Middle Ages. Some look practical, others like they were invented just to prove a point. Cranks, weights, and a device that clicks even when untouched, which you conveniently ignore to keep your sanity. In one corner, a bucket sits. Nobody talks about the bucket. No label, no owner, no explanation, just a silent authority ruling the room. You clean it out of duty, not curiosity. The smell is complicated. A mix of damp stone, hot iron, and something old clinging to the air like forgotten memories. You tried herbs. You tried incense. Once you even hung lavender, but it just mocked you. Gregor insists on tidiness. A messy workspace is unprofessional. He grumbles while aligning chains with a ruler. You learn to sweep daily, polish metal, and replace fraying ropes before they snap. This isn't cruelty. It's customer service. No decorations, no paintings, no flowers. Just a glove rack and a small bench where sometimes you sit and ponder how silence can hum. Yet, it's yours. Nobody else steps in. Nobody else touches anything because nobody else wants to. No one told you this going in. But the job demands math. Not the fun kind with coins or catapults. No. Your specialty is the math of pain, a cruel arithmetic involving joints, pressure, angles, and how long someone can stay conscious under perfectly medieval conditions. For example, did you know the average shoulder can twist 7 times before it pops out? You don't learn that from books. You learn it from experience, unfortunately. Someone else's experience. No charts, no official formulas, just mental math, quiet observations, and that kind of gut feeling usually reserved for locksmiths or battlefield surgeons. You gotta know when it's just enough. And when a little more turns into oops, Gregor taught you the basics. 3 twists for a warning. 4 to get honest. 5. If they're still lying about the goat, he's not joking. Medieval justice was obsessed with balance, just painful enough to encourage a confession, not so painful that you have to explain yourself to the bishop. Your tools come with no manual, but you learn anyway. You know their limits, like a musician knows their instruments. Wheels spin smoothly if oiled. Vises squeak when tightened too much. Iron collars have a sweet spot between snug and oops. That's too tight. Precision is everything. People think you're just some brute swinging wildly until someone yells the right name. But really, you're more like a chef. Timing, pressure, control, all crucial. Difference is, no one claps when you're done. Over time, you develop a sixth sense. You can eyeball someone and guess how many minutes they'll last before rethinking their entire life. Not pride, just pattern recognition. But here's the worst part when you're right too often. When your calculations are perfect, that's when the judge starts depending on you. He's still not confessing. Maybe we should give him the usual treatment. They say, like ordering stew at the pub, you're not a monster. You're a professional. With an internal calculator shockingly precise, calibrated by the number of screams per second. Most days, you're invisible. Sure, some people see you. They cross the street to avoid you, mumble prayers as you pass, and pretend to be fascinated by cracks in the cobblestones whenever you get close. But no one talks to you. Well, not unless they need something. Then suddenly, you're essential. A judge shows up at your door, looking tense and suspiciously polite. We'll need a confession soon. No mention of justice. No explanations. Just the expectation that you'll deliver results like an annoyingly efficient baker. Other times, it's a priest insisting it's all for saving souls. We must encourage repentance. Repentance here involves ropes, heat, and a windowless room. Spiritual growth through stress, you might say. Even merchants sometimes quietly tip you off. Of course, that arrival said certain things. Nothing official, mind you. If you happen to be tuning your tools today, maybe you'll stroll past his stall. You're never officially questioned, which means you're complicit. Instead, you get vague hints, nods, a small bag of coins left on your doorstep with a note. To keep order. Order is always popular, but once the job's done, silence falls again. The judge pretends not to know your name. The priest forgets. Your soul needs saving. The merchant avoids eye contact while overcharging for onions. Your usefulness has an expiration date, about 2 hours of screaming, and you accept it, not out of pride, but practicality. Wait for gratitude, and you'll starve to death. Your reward is steady work, a locked door, and the occasional fresh loaf of bread. In many ways, you're like a bucket of water under fire. No one thinks of that until everything's smoking. So where did the torturer go? And then it's just a damp floor, and footsteps fading away. The room's all stone. Stone floor. Stone walls. Stone ceiling. Solid as a rock and echoey as heck. That's problem number 1. Nobody warned you about the acoustics. Medieval architecture wasn't designed to muffle noise. In fact, if anything, it was built to celebrate sound, especially the kind that ruins your dinner mood. Screams, when they happen, don't just happen once. They bounce off walls, down hallways, into water basins, out the stairs, and on a damp day. They hit your pillow dead on, and they keep echoing. You finish a session, clean your tools, wash your hands, mutter some philosophical nonsense like, well, things escalated. Yet you still catch that faint echo somewhere overhead, like your workplace is trying to hold on to a vivid memory. Gregor calls it feedback. You've tried everything, stuffing straw into the cracks, rearranging your gear. You even asked the blacksmith about soundproof panels. He just stared at you like you asked for silk curtains in a plague house. Eventually, you adapt. You learn to tell the screams apart from the delayed ones. You can even tell which scream is from that morning and which is from 3 days ago. A grim sound. Villagers swear they don't hear it. But then they also swear you're not part of the community. A polite way of saying, yeah, we hear it. They just pretend it's thunder. At night, things get worse. The dungeon is silent. Too silent. Then a drip. An echo. Suddenly, you sit bolt upright, wondering if those chains learn to talk. You start sleeping with gloves on. Not for protection, just instinct. They feel safe, familiar. Like you could grab a tool and claim dominance over an empty hallway if needed. Some torturers lost their minds over that. At least that's what they said. You didn't. You just got used to being watched, not by people, but by echoes. The job doesn't haunt you. The leftover sounds do. And honestly, isn't that way worse? You'd think a gig dealing with confessions, fears, and the occasional dislocated noble would pay well. Nope. You're dead wrong. The pay sucks. It's inconsistent, confusing, and sometimes involves cheese. Officially, the town employs you. Unofficially, you get paid with whatever coins come from fines, voluntary donations, and sometimes someone's wallet left behind, hoping their nephew survives interrogation. Some weeks you get paid in silver. Other weeks, they hand you turnips and say, "This is justice for now." One time you got a chicken. It wasn't a good chicken. Looked like it heard rumors about your job and gave up. No salary. Just a vague promise your service is appreciated, which is medieval official speak for don't ask. You jot stuff in a little notebook, not expecting a paycheck, just to feel like you're doing office work. Gregor once told you, you'll never be rich doing this, but you'll always be needed, comforting and threatening at the same time. You're still not sure? You tried bargaining once. You calmly told the judge that tool sharpening isn't free. Ropes wear out, and vinegar isn't cheap. He nodded seriously, agreed with everything, then handed you a coin and thanked you for your continued silence. Quitting isn't an option. There's not exactly a line of eager applicants, and even if you quit, what would you put on your resume? Expert not tier, spatial reasoning pro, crowd control 1 at a time. So you stay, you budget, you reuse your tools, you learn to patch gloves, you learn to stew things that shouldn't be in stew. You got it working. The irony, your job's all about applying pressure, but financially, you're the one living under it. They fear your tools, but when the coin lands, you're scared of the butcher. And spoiler alert, he's not into haggling, contrary to popular belief. Medieval torture wasn't just a creative free-for-all or a series of bad decisions. There were rules, not great rules. Mind you, vague, sketchy rules, but rules nonetheless. For example, you couldn't just wake up and decide to interrogate someone just because they looked shady or had too many cats. Nope. You needed permission, usually from a judge, sometimes a priest, and once from a guy swearing he was sent by the king. Though his shoes told a different story, the law stated torture was a last resort. Unfortunately, last resort often translated to, we tried yelling at him for 10 minutes, and now we're out of ideas. There were guidelines, permanent injury off limits. At least officially, anything that left someone unable to walk, breathe, or remember their own name was a no-go, unless, of course, they confessed. Then, well, it was regrettable, but effective. You had to keep records, kind of. Usually that meant jotting down some vague notes on a wax tablet, subject uncooperative. Moderate persuasion applied, which could mean anything from a stern glare to 4 wheel turns and a dramatic pause. A priest was often required to be there, mainly to make sure the soul could still be saved while you pushed the skeletal system's limits. He rarely intervened unless it was time for a theology debate or lunch break. And yes, some devices were banned, like the Iron Maiden not used, not because it was too cruel, but because it was mostly a legend. On the other hand, you had to get cozy with the real tools, no fancy names. Just stuff like cranks and things with teeth. All this meant you lived in a weird space where pain was okay, but only just enough. You were always one bad day away from being called excessive, a term that usually ended with either getting fired or suddenly promoted, depending on who was watching. So yeah, torture was regulated, but not in a way that made anyone feel better about it. No farewell parties, no golden chalices awarded in gratitude, no parchment certificates thanking you for years of ligament service. You didn't retire from torturing, you just stopped showing up. If you were lucky, the job came with zero long-term plans. Nobody explained what happened when your hands started shaking or your knees creaked like old hinges. You just got slower, less precise. And when precision is the difference between a confession and a complicated mess, that's bad news. Gregor never retired. One day, he handed you his gloves, nodded like he was passing down the family cow, and walked off. He stepped out of the dungeon and disappeared into the fog like some grim fairy tale. No one ever saw him again. You assumed he died peacefully, probably while polishing some unnecessary sharp object. Of course, none of you planned on living that long anyway. There were always vague rumors about torturers who tried to run off, moved to another village, changed their names, and opened a bakery. But somehow, the gossip spread, and when the townsfolk found out their croissants were made by a guy who used to oil the crank, business usually tanked. One torturer tried to reinvent himself as a wandering healer. His medicine was surprisingly effective. So effective, in fact, that locals accused him of witchcraft and burned down his hut. Last heard, he was voluntarily working as a scarecrow. The truth is, your reputation clings to you like smoke. It sticks to your clothes, your voice, your shadow. Even if you quit, people don't forget. You're not a blacksmith or a shoemaker. You're the guy with the torture chamber. So you quietly stick around. You train an apprentice, take fewer assignments. He learned to sit more and fap less. Meanwhile, the town just pretended he was still around. Eventually, he knew someone else would take his place. They always do. And when that day came, maybe he'd just walk away, like Grior, into the mist, into the shadows, into the part of town where no one asked his name. Just not yet. He still had work to do. Years passed. People came and went. War broke out. Taxes rose. Plagues dropped by like old, unwanted friends. But he stayed quietly in the background, like an awkward architectural feature no one wanted to admit existed or fix. No one ever said it out loud, but everyone knew by now. He was part of the town's structure. He didn't expect a legacy. Torturers don't get legacies. They were whispered about, sometimes blamed for local curses, and mentioned in old tavern tales when the beer was strong and the mood dark. The kids swore he ate rats. Teenagers dared each other to knock on his door. Adults avoided eye contact, but somehow expected him to show up when things got messy. But among the officials, his name was spoken with a strange kind of respect. Not exactly respect, more like administrative support. He was reliable, silent, efficient, basically a broom kept behind a locked door. He never married. Who would he introduce himself to? Hi, I make a living by extracting the state-approved truth. Want to go for a walk? Friends were rare. The apprentice came closest. The poor kid finally stopped asking questions and started oiling the tools like he used to. He taught the kid everything, even the tricks to keep gloves from cracking in the cold. The kid never thanked him. which meant he was actually learning. One winter, a bishop came asking who handled justice in town. The judge simply pointed to him. The bishop nodded, asked no questions, and when stories were told later, no one ever mentioned his name. Just the man in the basement, more a role than a person, a necessary tool like a well or a gallows. He'd thought about carving his initials into the wooden chair he sat in between sessions, but figured it was unnecessary. The room already echoed his presence. If there was any legacy, it wasn't stone or writing. It was silence. The silence that fell after someone confessed. The street was dead quiet when he passed through. The heavy door never needed a label everyone knew. And when he left, no one mentioned it, which somehow felt just right. In medieval society, an invitation to a noble's feast wasn't just a meal. It was a statement of status, a political move, and sometimes a trap wrapped in silk. If you got an invite, it meant you were respected, useful, or under surveillance. No mass emails or reply-all links. Invitations arrived by courier. Sealed wax scrolls, scented cloth bags, or sometimes handed personally by a butler in the Lord's livery. For nobles and ladies, invites weren't just about eating. They were about being seen. Declining was basically throwing down a gauntlet, and showing up in the wrong outfit could wreck your family's rep for years. Miss one party, and rumors of sickness, poverty, or rebellion stuck to you like fleas on a hunting dog's back. Of course, peasants weren't on the list. Even minor nobles had to fight for favors. You didn't just get invited, you earned it. A recent land donation, a marriage, or a well-placed bribe could seal the deal. And if you got summoned without warning, it usually meant the host had something to prove or wanted to check up on you. Once the invite was accepted, preparations kicked off immediately. Tailors were called, hair trimmed, and servants sent ahead to claim the best spot in the hall. Why? Because your seat isn't just about comfort. It's a status symbol. Sitting closer to the Lord means power and trust. Farther away, you're just a useless cup to be knocked over. But politics isn't just about where you sit. Even how you arrive matters. Some guests show up with a whole entourage, flaunting their wealth with silk flags, gilded carriages, and glittering cloaks. Horses, too. Others sneak in quietly, hoping to eavesdrop more than be noticed. What no one admits out loud is this: the feast is a stage. The host is the director. Guests are actors. And the party, no matter how many swans, geese, or bottles of wine, is the performance. Getting an invite means stepping into that theater. Whether you leave with applause or get cut from the next act, that depends on how well you performed. No one just strolls into a medieval feast. That's like showing up to a royal wedding in muddy boots. These performances are scripted, calculated, choreographed, and sometimes just plain absurd. Picture this: the courtyard, lit by blazing torches, casting shadows on flags fluttering in the wind, the smell of hay, horse sweat, and thick anticipation fills the air. Then, a horn blasts loud enough to make a shepherd boy drop his bucket. Another noble arrives. The main gate swings open, and in rolls a gilded carriage, or maybe a galloping horse with a knight in a velvet cloak instead of armor. Behind him, servants rush in, arms full of gift chests, fine fabrics, even exotic birds to impress the host. Every step screams wealth. From embroidered cuffs to earrings dangling like tiny chandeliers on the ladies' ears. But not all arrivals are about making a grand entrance. Some guests prefer subtlety. Hooded cloaks, whispered words to the gatekeeper, no trumpets blaring. These are usually diplomats, spies, or rivals playing the long game, watching instead of being watched. At the great hall's door, Each guest gets a formal introduction, and this is no quick roll call. Long titles: Lord Eustace of Hemir, Defender of the Western Marches, Protector of Blackwood Hills, twice winner of the summer joust. By the time the announcer reaches halfway, the goose is cold inside. Guests quietly size up the room: who's here, who's suspiciously missing, who dared wear French silk in an English hall. Every smile hides calculation. Every bow is carefully weighed. This isn't just dinner. It's diplomacy with wine and roasted lamb. Meanwhile, servants flit around like well-trained shadows. They snatch cloaks, offer spiced wine, and whisper seating instructions. One wrong move, a noble sitting too close to the salt or too far from the Lord, and trouble's brewing before the first course hits the table. The arrival sets the mood. Applause, whispers, envy, or fear. Whether you storm in like a hero or slip in like a shadow. Once that door shuts behind you, the feast and the game have begun. You'd think sitting down to dinner would be the easiest part of a feast. But in a medieval banquet hall, seating is packed tighter than a catapult's ammo. At the center is the high table, usually raised on a dais, facing the rest of the hall like a throne watching over its kingdom. This is where the host and the most prestigious guests sit: kings, dukes, foreign officials, and anyone the host admires or fears to offend. Position here is everything. Sit too far left, and suddenly you're losing favor. Too close, and folks start whispering about favoritism. Flanking the high table are longer benches and side tables, ranked not by comfort, but by social hierarchy. The nobles sit up front, the knights a few seats behind, the guards behind them, and finally the merchants, clerics, and random others scattered like breadcrumbs at the back of the hall, sitting near the kitchen. Bad luck, or trouble's coming your way. But the real stress isn't just about where you sit. It's all about who can see you and who you're seen dining with. Sitting next to a rising star, instant status boost. Next to someone about to lose face. Yeah, good luck with that. Better eat fast, just in case. Then there's the salt. Yep, the spice of life. Sitting closer to the host meant you got the fancy imported salt. The folks down below considered less important. A brutal but oh so delicate culinary caste system. And don't forget last-minute changes. If someone bailed or a surprise guest showed up, the servants had to silently reshuffle the seating without spilling wine on the bishop's lap. One slip-up, and you'd have a scandal to gossip about for weeks. For guests, sitting down wasn't about chilling out. It was about watching and being watched. Every glance, every whisper, every premature bite was basically a political statement. The feast hadn't officially started yet, but don't get it twisted. This was when the real food fight began. The moment the host raised his glass, the whole hall transformed. Conversations stopped. Musicians paused, and every eye locked on the head of the table. Toasts were made, usually honoring God, the king, or some VIP. Then, like a drawbridge crashing down, the feast exploded into action. Forget your fancy three-course meals. Medieval feasts rolled out dish after dish, each one flashier than the last. The first round might be humble bread, cheese, and stewed veggies, but by round 2 or 3, all bets were off. Whole, roasted peacocks, arranged with feathers on pies. And when you cut in, surprise live birds, roasted with apples in their mouths. It wasn't just food. It was theater, and definitely not served on your grandma's china. Guests ate off trenchers thick, old bread soaked in fat, usually tossed to dogs, peasants, or simply thrown away afterward. Utensils optional. Fingers did most of the heavy lifting. Everyone got a personal knife, though standard issue. Forks were rare and felt weird. Every dish sent a message. A swan dish screamed prestige and wealth. Exotic spices shouted global trade. A saffron-tinted sweet egg tart flaunted your gold stash. Presentation mattered just as much as taste. A clever cook could win hearts by crafting a sugar castle or a lion-shaped jelly. Pull off a jaw-dropper, and you'd secure your kitchen throne and your master's favor. But not everyone got to taste it all. Dishes were divided by rank. High lords got the full feast, while lesser guests fought over scraps or depended on the servants' generosity. This wasn't a buffet. It was a carefully crafted social hierarchy. Trained servers glided between tables, balancing trays, whispering dish names, and avoiding disaster. One dropped cup demotion alert. Spill a plate on the bishop's lap. You'd be banished to cleanup duty. And as courses rolled on, the noise in the hall grew, louder and louder. Wine flowed faster, and inhibitions melted like butter on hot bread. The feast wasn't just to fill bellies. It fed egos, alliances, and ambitions. And the night was just getting started. Medieval feasts weren't just about roast venison and saffron custard. They were spectacles. And once the table was cleared, the real show began, while the chefs are busy whipping up the next meal. The lords and ladies are all eyes for the evening entertainment. The clowns kick things off. Don't let those silly hats fool you. These performers sharp as a tack. A fool could roast a duke and walk away scot-free. The nasty ones got thrown bones. Their slick acrobatics and rhyming insults kept tension from turning into full-blown drama with just one joke. A fool could either cool off a brewing fight or accidentally start one if his aim's off. Next up, the minstrels, the clink of goblets, harp strings, and flutes fill the hall as troubadour sings of noble deeds, tragic romances, or suspiciously. The lord's hunting dogs farts, feeling extra vain. A noble might even commission a song about themselves, hoping it spreads through courts like a catchy cold. For bigger occasions, the entertainment gets weirder. Dwarves in armor, sword fighting with wooden swords, bears dancing on chained collars, mystics reading fortunes between courses. Some lords even stage mini-plays with sets, props, and unlucky peasants forced into the crowd actor gig. And if the host really wants to impress, he might unleash fire eaters or self-proclaimed soul summoners sure to make the bishop sweat bullets. The audience doesn't just watch. They judge, nail the act, and you get gold coins, applause, maybe a private meet and greet with the host, but bore the crowd for more than 2 minutes. That's social death. Best case, you get ignored. Worst case, they throw stale bread and mutter you'd be better off digging ditches. Of course, not all the fun happens on stage. Whispered chats hum under the music. Lovers exchange glances. Rivals trade veiled threats. Deals get struck. Promises made. And occasionally, someone gets framed behind the curtain. The show's great? Sure. But it's also a giant distraction. It's the perfect cover for nobles to plot, flirt, or gossip for every joke cracking in the room. There are 10 serious plots brewing in the shadows, and as the wine flows and appetites roar, the party keeps going louder, messier, and way more dangerous than it looks. By the midpoint, restraint is dead and buried. No chance left. And who's the killer? The wine. Me. Or the beer. Sometimes all three, mixed with a sprig of rosemary and a prayer. Medieval parties didn't do drink responsibly. They poured wine in endless waves, filling your cup before you could blink, expecting you to toast every 3 sentences. Toast the host, the king, the weather, the pigs, and the clown's new haircut. Doesn't matter. The goal? Make everyone merry, relaxed, and ideally drunk enough to stop whining about the undercooked eel. But it's not just revenge. Wine's a political weapon. One too many drinks, and a knight might spill a regrettable secret. A merchant could blab trade secrets. A noblewoman might confess feelings for a rival family. Every sip lowers defenses, and the sharp-eyed guests take notes faster than the monastery scribes. Of course, the host knows this. He watches carefully who drinks what. Pouring isn't random. Want to calm someone's temper? Send a third cup their way. Want to dull a rival's senses before dropping a veiled threat? Another toast. Sir, want someone to make a total fool of themselves? Let the artist write them a special drinking song. Just for their royal hangover, some guests clutch their glasses like champions, calmly sipping, while others slur out their battle cries. Others, not so lucky, they slip into trenches, giggle with sauce on their faces, or challenge each other to wrestling matches by the spit-roasted pig. Alcohol strips titles away and turns lords into total fools. But even in all this chaos, there's some kind of ritual. Drinking customs mattered. You toast with your right hand, never turn your back on the high table, and never drink before the host. Breaking these rules wasn't just disrespectful. It could land you in hot water or ruin your rep. Though, honestly, many didn't care. Once the wine flowed, ambitions blurred. Enemies toasted each other. Allies muttered curses, and alliances shuffled around like chairs in a crowded hall. By the end, some guests were red-faced and laughing their heads off. Others whispered in corners, and a lucky few just tried not to pass out in their soup. The feast wasn't over yet, but the line between celebration and conspiracy was totally blurred. In a medieval feast, not all tastes are created equal. Sure, it looks like a free-for-all of roasted beasts and sweets, but every bite is ruled by rank. Let's start with the obvious, the high table. Here, the nobility practically drown in delicacies. They pick the best cuts, first tender meats, rare birds, almond honey pastries, and special white puddings reserved only for those decked out in the fanciest badges. A servant slices precisely, and their cups never hit empty. Just a few steps down the social food chain, you find the lower nobles and knights. Their food looks similar, but tastes way less exciting. They get legs instead of breasts, fish instead of venison, and if the steward's feeling generous, a spoonful of sauce brought up ahead of time. That's the fancy dinner. Behind them are the clergy, scholars, merchants, and other bigwigs. The host didn't want to insult anyone, but wasn't exactly up for chit-chat either. Their trenches might have stew, boiled veggies, and if lucky, something mildly spiced, of course, watered down. And then there were the servants, musicians, entertainers, and poor souls stuck flipping meat on spits. They might get to eat after the guests leave, or not at all. Leftovers were treasure, divided strictly by rank. The jester might snag a piece of pie, the groom got the crust. But the worst part, it wasn't even what you got, it was how it got to you, if you mattered. Food came on a silver plate with all the pomp and bows. If not, you just heard clattering dishes and grumbling. Sometimes you had to pass the plate along and pray some food made it back your way. And if you were at the end of the line, well, the food might still be warm when it finally made its rounds. Food was fuel, sure, but also a scoreboard, a vivid reminder of who was important and who was just filling space, while the great hall echoed with laughs, music, and the occasional hiccup of a drunk. Real chaos was backstage in the kitchen. Huge, smoky, and unbearably hot. This was the party's engine room, running on sweat, stress, and total panic. Forget the image of a calm chef tasting ingredients. The medieval kitchen was a bustling ecosystem, sometimes with dozens of workers. There were spit boys, usually young kids, whose only job was to turn heavy meat over the fire for hours. Their arms went numb. Faces flushed red. They begged for mercy or release, but got none. Then came the sauce makers, butchers, pastry chefs, and the unlucky souls scrubbing everything clean with sand, ash, and sheer stubbornness. Orders were shouted over the roar of the hearth. Holes had to be stuffed, pies sealed tight, birds roasted, and eels skinned like it was some kind of bizarre ritual, all timed perfectly to send out each batch of food right on cue. Timing was everything. Too early, and the goose would be cold. Too late, and the Lord might take it as a personal insult. But this wasn't just a kitchen. It was a battlefield for ambition. The head chef wielded power almost equal to the butler. Nail a dish, and you might just land a steady gig. Spill a secret, and you were out, or worse, publicly humiliated, like that poor kitchen boy who confused saffron with mustard. That kind of screw-up could land you a week cleaning the guardroom or worse. The ingredients themselves were weird and expensive. Sugar came from faraway lands, spices like cinnamon, cloves, and pepper had to be measured like precious jewels. One careless pinch could cost more than a servant's weekly wage. Despite the pressure, chefs generally got along pretty well. They communicated with gestures, sharp glances, and a strict hierarchy that rivaled the main hall. They knew who was allowed to touch the meat, who could season it, and who had better stay out of the way unless tasked with fetching firewood. And when the dish was ready, it was presented like a royal business. Every plate was a messenger, every pie a performance. The kitchen might be hidden away, but its success or disaster would be the talk of the nobility for weeks. As candles burned low and the air thickened with wine, roasting fat, and way too much perfume, the party morphed. It slowed down. The music softened, and those fancy masks, forced smiles, and careful words started to fade. The last party came and went, usually a sweet little affair, with almonds or spiced fruit, to show off status rather than satisfy hunger. Servants cleaned up the wreckage bones, shells, broken trenchers while discreetly eavesdropping for any juicy gossip. Out back, some guests lingered, poking at cheese wheels or nursing sips of wine they couldn't even taste anymore. This was when the real business began. Drunken merchants whispered deals over half-empty cups. Embarrassed ambassadors blushed and made promises they'd regret by sunrise. Lovers sneaked off behind tapestries or into moonlit gardens, chased by gossip or opportunity. And somewhere in a corner, a small nobleman, utterly smashed, was being helped into a cloak he'd probably never remember taking off. But for the host, the night was far from over. He noted who stayed too long, who left too early, and who stirred up trouble. Spilled cup might be forgiven. A drunken insult to a favored guest, not so much. Every laugh, every gesture, every frown was weighed carefully. The party might be over, but its ripple would spread through the court like a gem dropped in a well, and not everyone got to leave right away. Some guests were invited to rooms to sober up and sleep it off. Others were politely escorted to their carriages, especially if they started singing. A few unlucky souls ended the night propped against pillars, dreaming of roast turkey and regretting that third spiced wine. When dawn broke over the mansion, the great hall was silent, strewn with half-burned candles, overturned cups, and echoes of ambition, laughter, and regret. Servants began scrubbing the floors. Chefs collapsed beside the dying embers, and the host retreated to tally favors gained and debts incurred. Medieval feasts were never just about food. They were performances, negotiations, displays of wealth and control. Every pie, every toast, every tune was carefully choreographed chaos. And in the end, when the last cup was drained, all that remained were memories and probably a wicked hangover. So if your mental image of the Middle Ages is everyone dirty, flea-ridden, and terrified of soap? Maybe think again. Sure, plenty of muddy farmers probably trudged through life on foot. But for many medieval townsfolk, the public bath was just another part of the weekly routine. And no, we're not talking about some half-hearted dunk in a pond. These were purpose-built spaces designed for cleanliness, relaxation, and sometimes, well, a bit more. Medieval European public baths actually trace their roots way back to Roman traditions. After the Western Roman Empire fell, lots of those baths got wrecked, but the idea stuck around. By the Middle Ages, cities all over, especially in places like France, Germany, and parts of Italy, were bringing back the communal bathing culture. In fact, bathhouses were often among the very first stone buildings popping up in newly chartered towns. Inside, the decor could be surprisingly fancy. Think tiled floors, big wooden tubs, or small stone pools, hot rooms, cooling rooms, and sometimes even massage tables. Water was heated in giant copper cauldrons and piped or carried into the baths. Some baths had multiple tubs at different temperatures, kind of like the Roman caldarium, tepidarium, and frigidarium setup. So yeah, this isn't your rough and tumble medieval life. This is spa day, 13th century style. But bathing wasn't just about hygiene, it was a social event. People bathed together, friends, couples, even strangers. You could chat with neighbors, gossip about politics, or even seal a business deal while scrubbing your armpits. And for couples, it could get pretty romantic. Some baths even had private rooms where lovebirds could soak in peace and quiet. Others' privacy was not on the menu. Bathhouses weren't just for the rich and fancy. Craftsmen, merchants, and even well-off farmers dropped by regularly, especially on Saturdays. It was a weekly ritual, a way to show up fresh for Sunday service, looking and smelling like a proper Christian. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this. Some religious bigwigs griped about naughty behavior in the mixed-gender baths, but plenty of clergy used them too, usually in more discreet, separate settings. Bottom line, baths were more than just tubs of water. They were medieval crossroads where soap, society, and sin all mingled under one steamy roof. Step into a medieval bathhouse, and you might be surprised. These weren't dirty little huts and alleys with leaky roofs. Many were carefully built, sometimes downright luxurious, not just for function, but for comfort, style, and street cred. From the outside, they might look like modest homes or small civic buildings in wealthy towns. But inside, the vibe changed completely. Bathhouses were warm and steamy havens. Flickering torchlight bounced off damp plaster walls. Tile floors slick with condensation, and the air smelled faintly of herbs, soap, and hot water. The layout usually followed a Roman-inspired sequence. First up was the changing room, or apoditerium, where folks left their clothes with an attendant, often while chatting up other guests. Then came the heated rooms. Water boiled in huge copper cauldrons and was piped or carried in big wooden or stone tubs. Some spots had massive communal pools, while others offered rows of private tubs, like a medieval naked market, shouting bath time. Temperature was key. Warm, not scalding. The posh baths even had multiple rooms with different temps. Some mimicked the Roman caldarium hot room, tepidarium warm, and frigidarium cold bath. The fancier the place, the trickier the architecture. Vaulted ceilings held in heat, with chimneys for ventilation. Wooden benches lined the walls for those who liked to sweat it out before a soak. Lighting was minimal, but deliberate. Candles and oil lamps cast soft shadows, creating a cozy, almost dreamy bathhouse atmosphere. In fancier spots, walls sometimes got decked out with tapestries or murals, and fresh reeds or herbs scattered on the floor to mask smells and add a splash of green. Then came the little luxuries: rosewater bowls for washing your face, linen towels, combs and razors for grooming, and sometimes even a servant to rub your back or give you a shoulder massage. If you could afford it, you got treated like royalty, even if you were just the town baker. These baths weren't just buildings. They were carefully crafted experiences, temples of cleanliness, sure, but also status, comfort, and community hubs. Architecture wasn't just about function. It set the mood for everything happening inside. Once you stripped down and soaked in the bath, it wasn't just about splashing water around. Medieval bathing followed a surprisingly structured routine, a ritual of steam, soap, and scrubbing, mixing Roman tradition with medieval practicality. Most moms started by warming the body with a gentle soak in hot water. This wasn't just chilling out. It helped open pores and clean out dirt. Bath attendants, called rubbers or stridulators, were usually on hand to help, especially in the posh places. They'd bring soft linen towels, herbal mouthwash, and if you had cash, some fancy essential oils too. Next up, soap. Not the fancy mass-produced bars, you know. Medieval soap was usually a rough, brown lump made from animal fat. In some areas, especially under Islamic influence like southern Spain, olive oil soap was prized and imported for being gentle and smelling nice. Soap got rubbed in hard sometimes by the bather, sometimes by the attendant until the body was slick and foamy. Then came the scraping and exfoliating, like the Romans before them. Medieval women often used a curved metal tool called a strigil. They'd scrape it down their skin to get rid of dead cells, dirt, and oil. Not exactly spa-level pampering. It could be a bit rough, but it left you feeling seriously clean. Some bathers even used coarse cloth or natural abrasives like salt or crushed herbs to scrub deeper. Hair care was another step. Men trimmed beards or massaged scalp with vinegar and rosemary. Women sometimes combed long hair with herbal water and carefully dried it by the fire. The fanciest baths offered grooming services like shaving, nail cleaning, and even bandaging small wounds. The final rinse was usually cool or warm. Water poured over the head from a basin or ladled from the tub. Then came the linen towel if you were lucky, or rough wool if you weren't. All this effort wasn't just about hygiene. It was about presentation and pride. Cleanliness was tied to moral uprightness and social respect. Back when body odor could mark you as uncivilized, baths weren't just for smelling nice. They were about status. To medieval folks, baths weren't just about cleaning up. They were social stages. After scrubbing and shampooing, you didn't just dry off and head home. You stuck around. You chatted. You schemed. Baths built reputations, sealed deals, and spread gossip better than any castle courtyard. Let's talk business. Merchants often used bathhouses as neutral ground for negotiations. Why no weapons? No guards? Just warm water and good vibes. When your opponent's half submerged and relaxed, they're way more likely to say yes to that grain shipment or agree on a better wool price. Public baths were perfect for blowing off steam in conversations, literally and figuratively. Then came the juicy gossip sessions, lords' disputes, land fights, tax changes. Local scandals all spilled out here. The bath workers themselves were gold mines of info. They saw who came in together, who left looking flushed, and who whispered way too close in the steam. Wanna know who secretly met the bishop's cousin? Ask the guy swapping out towels. And of course, wherever there's steam and skin, there's flirting happening. Mixed gender bathing was all the rage across Europe, especially in Germany and Central Europe, right up until the late Middle Ages. Guys and gals soaking side by side in tubs, sometimes even sharing the same one. Some bathhouses even had couples dining together while soaking. Wooden trays floated between them, loaded with booze, fruit, and sweet meats. Subtle nope. This was about as classy as a frat party. Naturally, this raised a few eyebrows. Clergy types loved to condemn bathhouses as hotbeds of temptation. Pamphlets warned about lust bubbling up in the steamy water. And honestly, they weren't always wrong. Some bathhouses had quite the shady reputations. Stories abound, some true. Some wildly exaggerated about secret curtains, back rooms, and extra services for those in the know. In some cities, the line between bathhouse and brothel got so blurry, officials had to step in, setting rules about who could work there and what exactly was on the menu. But for most folks, the bathhouse was just a place to chill out together in a world without coffee shops, gyms, or social media. These steamy communal spots were basically the town square for the naked crowd, a place to connect, swap stories, and see who you really are once you ditch armor and cloaks. Weirdly enough, medieval bathhouses weren't just for scrubbing and gossip. They also had table service. In many towns, you didn't just bathe. You dined while you bathed. Yep. Amid the warm steam of the public bath, trays of roast meats, pastries, and wine floated around like tiny ships of indulgence. This practice was especially popular in Central and Northern Europe. In German-speaking parts of the Holy Roman Empire, baths there doubled as dining spots. Not just creepy water holes, they served multi-course meals, rivaling some fancy banquet halls all enjoyed while soaking with friends, spouses, or potential love interests. Meals usually came on floating trays, special wooden platforms, with raised edges to prevent disaster. One person might bring roast chicken, another a bit of beer, while someone else hauled in soft bread and honey-glazed dates. Want to impress your bath buddy? You could even send over a tray, like the medieval version of buying someone a drink at the bar, just with a lot more splashing. Servers, usually barefoot to avoid slipping, navigated between tubs and benches, balancing plates, topping off glasses, and keeping the vibe classy, or at least tidy. Larger bathhouses had private rooms with their own tubs and tables, perfect for intimate meals, often lit by candlelight. The combo of warmth, wine, and dim lighting definitely didn't kill the flirt factor in bath culture. But hey, not everything was debauchery. For those who couldn't afford wine and roast duck, bathhouses still served simple grub stews, meat pies, or bread and cheese. Eating together reinforced the social vibe of the bathhouse. You were part of the group, sharing a meal, especially naked, which really broke down social stiffness. Of course, the church raised an eyebrow at this whole setup. Dinner without clothes. Scandalous. Drinking with the opposite sex in the tub. Straight up sinful. Still, these steamy dinners went on for centuries, proving people in any era love a little luxury with their soap. Bathhouses were never just about washing up. They were a full-on sensory experience. Hot water, soft music, good food, and the ever-present chance your date night could end in romance or juicy gossip. But behind all that warmth and charm, medieval baths hid a dark, fiery secret. They could kill you. When the plague hit town, especially the infamous Black Death public baths, morphed overnight from social havens to deadly traps. At first, no one really connected the dots. People kept flocking to the bathhouse even while plague rumors were flying around. In fact, plenty believed a good soak would keep them safe. After all, scrubbing off dirt and stink was basically a moral and spiritual cleanse too. Some folks even tossed herbs like sage, lavender, and rosemary into the bath, hoping to purify both body and air. Doctors back then swore warm baths fixed your bodily fluids out of whack. But Surprise, surprise. There was a major flaw in that logic. Baths were communal. People shared tubs. They shared towels. They shared trays of food. And since infectious diseases spread through fleas, bad hygiene, or close contact, these cozy, steamy rooms turned into disaster incubators. Even worse, many tubs were near water sources that fed public wells. Dirty bath water, full of dead skin, sweat, and sometimes blood could easily contaminate the town's drinking water. When plagues hit in waves during the 14th and 15th centuries, bathhouses came under heavy scrutiny. At first, they got temporary shutdowns, then permanent closures in some cities. Religious leaders, long suspicious of bathhouses' morality, now had medical ammo to back them up. Some argued it was better to be dirty and alive than clean and buried 6 feet under. And just like that, the centuries-old bathing culture started to crumble. People got paranoid. Soap makers saw a sales tank. Public bath owners shut down shop. The ones still open had to roll out new protocols. Private tubs, fewer guests, more herbs and perfumes to clean the air, though none of it actually worked. Some locals even paid priests to bless the water, a mix of superstition and desperation. Ironically, as tubs vanished from cities, overall hygiene tanked too. Fear of infection made people stop washing their hands altogether. So by the late Middle Ages, the image of the filthy, scruffy peasant wasn't totally off. It was just born from fear, not laziness. From fancy spas to plague quarantine rooms, the fall of the bathhouse happened fast and tragically. Behind the medieval bath's steamy charm was an invisible army. The workers who kept everything running smoothly. They scrubbed floors, hauled water, stoked fires, and dealt with half-naked nobles barking orders while balancing wine glasses. And like everything medieval, there was a strict hierarchy even in the baths. At the top was the bath manager, or Stublin in some German-speaking spots. This guy ran the whole show: maintenance, supplies, schedules, and most importantly, the vibe. He was part janitor, part spa boss, part gossip king. If anyone dared, under him were servants, mostly men in public baths, women elsewhere. Depending on local customs and laws, their jobs: getting the tubs ready, helping guests undress, pouring rinse water, and in many places, offering light massages or grooming. A reliable attendant could make or break your bath experience. Then came the laborers, usually boys or poor townsfolk. They hauled buckets of hot water, chopped wood, scrubbed used tubs, and cleaned up after wine-fueled drunken nights. These invisible hands kept the whole system running often, just for a warm meal and a bunk near the steam. In bigger or fancier baths, you'd also find cooks, musicians, and servers. Some baths were so fancy, they hired performers, jugglers, singers, even a mini theater troupe to entertain bathers. These workers had to balance serving guests and keeping things polite, especially where baths had a reputation for more than just washing. And in some cases, bath staff doubled as spies. An eager attendant could eavesdrop on whispered deals, watch who bathed with whom, and report back to the powerful bosses. Lords and clergy were known to plant informants inside bathhouse, especially when politics got spicy. Even though they played a key role, bathhouse staff lived on society's fringe. They were always under suspicion, especially during plague outbreaks, accused of spreading disease or shady behavior. But without them, warmth, rituals, and all that fancy stuff would be pretty damn cold. Bathhouses might have been equalizers in the tubs, but outside, social ladders stayed firmly in place. If anyone kept a close eye on bathhouse, it was the medieval church. To them, baths mixed cleanliness with lust, and steam was basically a smokescreen for sin. On paper, The church had no beef with hygiene. Plenty of monasteries even had their own bath areas, and religious texts sometimes praised cleanliness as a virtue-clean body, clean soul, yada yada. But shared baths, mixed tubs, wine, and music to the church, that was a temptation wrapped up in a towel. By the 13th century, when public baths were booming across European cities, sermons started targeting the moral dangers lurking inside. Priests warned that bathing encouraged lust, indecency, and secret hookups. Some even claimed Satan was stirring the pot, seducing good Christians straight down the moral drain. And rumors? Oh, they were pouring fuel on that fire. Stories spread about rich patrons booking private rooms for way more than just soaking. Word was, bathhouse staff offered special services at bargain prices, and couples got busy behind steamy curtains. Whether those stories were blown out of proportion or dead on, the church didn't wait around to find out. In more conservative towns, church councils started slapping down restrictions. Mixed bathing got banned in some places. In others, baths had to close on Sundays or holy days. Some areas required gender-specific hours. Others forced bathhouse owners to register staff and customers, turning bathhouses into supervised zones. But despite all the suspicion, plenty of clergy still used bathhouse just on the down low. Bishops and abbots often booked private rooms or used monastery baths where things were easier to keep an eye on. The tension between public morality and private indulgence got pretty intense. Eventually, during the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, Protestant leaders cracked down even harder. They saw public baths as rotten leftovers of Catholic decadence and tried to cleanse society by shutting them down, ironically making public hygiene worse. The church might not have built the baths, but boy, did they try to control them? In doing so, they turned humble bathing into a spiritual balancing act between clean bodies and clean souls. Hygiene and heresy, a splash of water and a slippery slope. At their peak, medieval bathhouses were the heart of urban life, lively, social, and surprisingly fancy. But by the late Middle Ages, these bustling hygiene and social hubs had almost vanished. What happened? A bunch of forces clashed, leading to public bathing's downfall. The first and most obvious blow was the Black Death and recurring plagues, which permanently shattered public trust in shared spaces, even though we now know fleas and poor sanitation caused it. Back then, many blamed bathhouses as the breeding grounds of death. Steam, communal tubs, damp linens all looked suspicious as hell. By the 15th century, fear trumped cleanliness. But there were other pressures too. As moral conservatism spread, especially during the Protestant Reformation, churches were increasingly seen as dens of immoral vice. Reformers didn't see baths as hygiene spots, but as hotspots for temptation and sin to them. Nakedness and spirituality just didn't mix even with a clean towel. At the same time, medical thinking started to shift. New theories about disease and the body put a big emphasis on dryness. Some doctors warned that hot water would open up your pores and make you way more prone to infections. Cold, dry skin? Yeah, that became the new standard. And then, suddenly, people who avoided bathing weren't considered gross anymore. They were actually pretty smart. Urban growth played a part too, as cities expanded and old water systems crumbled. Keeping large public baths running got tricky. Hot, fresh water was crazy expensive. Drains got clogged, rules piled up, and when baths stopped making bank like they used to, many shut down. By the 16th century, personal hygiene started getting the VIP treatment. Wealthy families often installed their own bathtubs. Fancy? Right. Scented fabrics and dry-cleaned linens became the rage. Bathing went from a public ritual to a private, even secret, affair, and just like that, an institution that lasted centuries faded away. Laughter, music, gossip, floating food trays all vanished into thin air. Now, all that's left are ruins, old manuscripts, and a few architectural relics reminding us that hygiene was never just soap and water. It meant community. It meant chatting. It meant stepping into a steam-filled room and seeing people. Actually, it was your neighbor. Before being called the Silk Road, it was just dusty trails, faint arteries cutting through blazing deserts and snowy mountains, paths carved out by herders, nomads, and early merchants would one day become the most legendary trade network in human history. Its real boom started during the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BC, when China pushed west, looking for allies against the brand new Xiongnu nomads. Instead, they found opportunity a world of horses, glass, spices, and a craving for silk. But this wasn't exactly a smooth ride. The eastern edge kicked off at Chang'an, now Xi'an, one of the biggest, most international cities of the ancient world. From there, merchants loaded camel caravans with shimmering silk rolls, tea bundles, lacquerware, and even porcelain. Then they didn't just head to one spot. They passed through a chain of hubs, markets, and oasis cities stretching all the way to the Mediterranean. This was no single road. It was a sprawling network winding through deserts, mountain passes, and kingdoms. From China, traders crossed the Taklamakan Desert, dubbed the no-return zone, by some then Central Asia, Persia, and finally Byzantine lands. Goods changed hands like hot potatoes, along with stories, languages, and even religious ideas. It was more like a bloodstream of culture than just a road. But hold up, don't romanticize it too fast. The journey was brutal. The blazing Gobi sun cracked lips and scorched skin. Sandstorms could bury entire caravans. Wells dried up. Bandits lurked on sand dunes, yet traders kept going. Not just for the cash, but for survival. Success meant returning home filthy rich. Failure, buried in sand. Just another soul claimed by the desert roots. Still, it was worth it. Silk was worth its weight in gold. Roman nobles drooled over it. Persian kings demanded it. So right from the start, the Silk Road was never just about trade. It was about connection. Empires linked by camel hooves and caravan bells. Cultures blended through ink pots and fabric. A route born not just of geography, but human ambition. And that irresistible urge to reach beyond the horizon. Imagine waking before dawn. The air still chilly despite the day's desert heat. You rise from your woven mat, brush sand off your face, and check your most important companions, not fellow traders, but your camels. These creatures are the backbone of the Silk Road caravan, grumpy, chewing, and stubborn as hell. A typical caravan could have dozens, even hundreds of camels, each lugging up to 500 pounds of good silk bales, spice sacks, wool rolls, ivory, and jade blocks. But they weren't just hauling stuff. They were carrying civilization itself. Life on the caravan was no picnic. Merchants moved from oasis to oasis, timing their trips to dodge the desert's brutal sun. They followed ancient routes, marked by stars and white bones. Yeah, the bones of folks who got lost. By day, they slogged through scorching sand dunes and rocky passes. At night, they huddled around flickering fires, baking flatbread, brewing broth, swapping news from faraway cities, and watching out for bandits. Security was no small deal. The whole Silk Road was famous for bandits who knew exactly how much a bolt of silk was worth. That's why many caravans hired mercenaries, usually Turkish or Sogdian warriors skilled with bows and swords, when they weren't fending off attackers. These tough guys kept the peace among the travelers. Tensions flared. Often hot tempers, combined with low water supply, is a recipe for drama. Meanwhile, camels just kept on trucking, masters of adaptation. They could go days without water, glide over sinking sands, and endure monotony so intense it'd snap a horse's legs. Sometimes they wore bells, woven hats, and colorful cloth to flaunt the merchant's status or scare off evil spirits. Along the route, caravans stopped at caravanserais, fortified roadside inns offering food, shelter, and a precious chance to rest. These hubs were crossroads where Arabic mixed with Sanskrit, Chinese with Greek, and deals got hammered out in dozens of languages. Caravans weren't just pit stops, they were cultural melting pots. Life on the Silk Road was exhausting, dangerous, and soul-crushing at times, but also kind of addictive. Rolling with a caravan meant you were at the heart of a massive exchange, a living artery of wealth, gossip, and risk that stitched the world together. One dusty footprint at a time, the desert might look like an endless ocean of sand and heat. But for savvy merchants on the Silk Road, salvation was those sparkling green oases scattered across the barren land. These spots weren't just water stops, they were lifelines, trading hubs, and shady refuges under palm fronds. Places like Dunhuang, Kashgar, and Merv weren't just rest stops. They were bustling towns built around survival. Each had its own vibe. Dunhuang, on the edge of the Gobi Desert, was a spiritual and artistic center with Buddhist cave temples. Kashgar, further west, buzzed with life, part market, part fortress, part cultural crossroads. Caravans could resupply here, swap goods, trade camels, and gather intel on which routes were safe, which were crawling with bandits, or buried under sandstorms. And between these urban oases were more caravanserais, sturdy forts spaced about a day's travel apart, built with thick walls and tall gates, designed to protect travelers and their precious cargo. The layout was practical, a central courtyard to unload animals, sleeping quarters, storage rooms, kitchens, and often a small prayer area. Sometimes they even had a cook, a healer, or an in-house entertainer. Imagine coming back after days in the desert, swollen feet, dry throat, eyes stinging from the wind, and finding a warm meal, a straw bed, and safe walls. For a weary merchant, that's basically heaven on earth. But these stops weren't just about comfort. They were economic engines. Local traders showed up at inns to swap or sell goods to passing caravans. News spread fast: exchange rates, weather reports, war rumors, new taxes, road closures. A whole underground info network thrived in the dusty corners of these stops. Religious sites also popped up near oases, offering protection from threats that went beyond just the physical. A small temple, a monk's hut, or a carved symbol on a wall could soothe the nerves of a superstitious traveler. Many folks paused to toss a coin or say a quick prayer before heading west or east into the great unknown. Without the oases and caravan stops, the Silk Road would have stayed just a dream. These places weren't just pit stops. They were hidden civilizations in the wilderness, proving that, even in the harshest terrain, humans somehow managed to build connections, communities, and, of course, trade. When you think Silk Road, you think silk, and yeah, silk deserved the hype. Soft, shiny, and shockingly lightweight. Silk was China's crown jewel. But camel caravans didn't just haul fabric, they carried the empire's wildest dreams packed in sacks and wooden crates. East to west, porcelain, tea, lacquerware, paper, and spices like cinnamon and ginger rolled through. And don't forget the Chinese compass and crossbow, which revolutionized navigation and warfare. But the Silk Road wasn't a one-way street. From the Mediterranean and Middle East came glass, silver, wool, coral, wine, and dyed fabrics. Even plain old soap became a hot commodity in the East. Along with colored inks and dyes, Central Asian cities like Samarkand and Bukhara played the middleman role. Merchants here rarely traveled the whole route themselves. Instead, they'd buy goods from one end and flip them for a profit to traders coming the other way. So stuff changed hands dozens of times before reaching its final destination. By the time a bolt of silk hit Rome, its price had skyrocketed tenfold, and nobody remembered who first loaded it onto a camel. But this trade was more than just luxury goods. Demand for silk helped bankroll Chinese dynasties. Importing horses from Central Asia changed Chinese warfare forever. Persian silver fueled the Byzantine treasury, and over time, even paper and gunpowder, two of history's game changers, would cross deserts strapped to tired beasts. Alongside material riches came ideas. Buddhist scriptures traveled from India to China. Islamic art and astronomy spread eastward. Greek philosophy found its way into Arabic manuscripts. This wasn't just a trade route. It was a cultural superhighway, buzzing with creativity and inspiration. Not all goods were glamorous, though. Caravans hauled raw minerals, herbs, grains, and dried fruits. Some even transported exotic animals, peacocks, parrots, lions' gifts for emperors or performers for wealthy patrons. There was also a brisk slave trade, with people bought and sold like livestock across Eurasia. Everything had value. Everything had a price. And caravans carried it all wrapped in leather, packed in barrels, jingling with bronze seals over mountains, deserts, and real or imagined borders. The Silk Road sounds dreamy. But for travelers, danger lurked behind every sand dune and mountain ridge. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes, and neither do bandits. Robbery was a constant threat in these remote, lonely stretches. Armed raiders, sometimes nomads, sometimes mercenaries, scouted the horizon for slow-moving caravans. These weren't petty thieves. Some operated in organized gangs with scouts, weapons, and even informants in oasis towns. They knew exactly when a caravan's guard was slack, or when silk was worth more than gold. Ambushes struck fast, and brutal camels scattered. Goods looted. Guards killed or captured. Survivors, if any, had to walk barefoot on sand, too ashamed to face home, to fight back. Wealthy merchants hired armed escorts, usually horsemen from local tribes who knew the land, and the bandits like the back of their hand. Others paid tolls or bribed powerful nomad groups for protection, which usually meant fewer raids. But even if you dodged human threats, nature had its own arsenal, the Taklamakan and Gobi deserts, infamous for their savage sandstorms. Fierce tornadoes could slash visibility down to zero and bury travelers alive. Panicked camels, vanishing roads. Guys who wandered off the group could be swallowed by sand dunes in just minutes. Up in the mountain passes, avalanches and rock slides replaced sand as your worst nightmare. Narrow trails and slippery footing meant one wrong step could send your herd tumbling off a cliff, taking half your profits with it. High altitudes brought freezing nights, frostbite, and altitude sickness. Many land traders showed up totally unprepared for these conditions. Then came the heat. Desert temps soared by day and plummeted at night. Travelers got cracked skin, infected wounds, dehydration, and hallucinations. Sometimes wells would dry up without warning, and water thieves got hanged on the spot, no trial needed. Disease was a silent killer, too. Just one cough in the caravan could cause deadly consequences way worse than you'd expect. With zero knowledge of infectious diseases, travelers mingled freely, and so did fleas, bacteria, and viruses. Invisible invaders that eventually brought empires to their knees, surviving a full trip. That was something to brag about. Merchants returned home skinnier, more exhausted, often richer, but definitely changed. Every scar, every lost camel, every burial in the sand was a constant reminder. The Silk Road demanded more than just money. It required blood, sweat, and an iron will to keep moving forward. While silk and spices stuffed saddlebags, it was new ideas that truly shook up the Silk Road. Caravans carried more than just goods. They hauled beliefs, languages, and worldviews, spreading like wildfire through dust. One of the biggest cultural exports, Buddhism, starting in India. It steadily moved east via merchants and monks, tagging along with caravans. Once it hit China, it evolved, soaking up local beliefs and spawning new art, philosophy, and architecture. Monasteries popped up along the route. Places like Bamiyan in Afghanistan and Dunhuang in western China offered rest, food, and spiritual refuge for travelers. These weren't just temples. They were cultural vaults with scrolls, murals, and stories linking east and west. Islam followed a similar path, but in reverse, spreading from the Middle East into Central Asia and eventually parts of western China. When merchants set up shop in oasis towns, they brought the Quran, Arabic script, and a worldview built around trade, law, and learning. Cities like Samarkand became intellectual crossroads where Persian poets, Arab scientists, and Indian mathematicians studied together in candlelit libraries. You could find Zoroastrian fire temples, Christian missionaries, Nestorian churches, and even Manichaean scrolls in remote towns. The Silk Road didn't demand religious loyalty. It simply absorbed everything, letting pilgrims, prophets, and philosophers ride along with silk traders and camel herders. Language became a survival tool and a diplomatic weapon. In markets, at Bukhara or Kashgar, a merchant might hear Persian, Sogdian, Sanskrit, Chinese, Arabic, Greek, even a bit of Latin. Interpreters called dragomans were essential guides through this multilingual maze. Some folks made careers just by knowing how to say silk, safe, and numbers in 15 languages, and languages came packed with stories, fables, myths, legends, and rumors traveled across the continent. An epic poem born in Persia might become a fireside tale in Mongolia. A proverb spoken in China could echo through the hills of Anatolia. Ideas, once planted, were harder to track than camels, but way more stubborn. In the end, the Silk Road was more than a trade route. It was humanity's highway where beliefs clashed, bloomed, and endured, riding on the backs of every caravan daring enough to cross the sands. Among the endless stuff traded along the Silk Road, silk, jade, spices, ideas, there was one thing nobody wanted to carry: death. Diseases hitched rides on those dusty trails too. And they weren't exactly into bartering. Nope. They just consumed everything in sight. The Black Death, of course, is the poster child for this, while its exact origins are still up for debate. Most historians agree it rode the main Silk Road trade route, spreading west from Central Asia's steppes to Black Sea ports, then wrecking Europe. The plague spread faster than any army, hitching a ride not just on merchants and soldiers, but also on fleas clinging to rats hiding in sacks of grain and cargo. Basically, caravans were perfect petri dishes for diseases. Dozens of people and animals crammed together, sharing water, food, and beds, all under the bare minimum hygiene standards. Add in travelers from all sorts of climates with zero shared immunity. The result? A slow-burning biological bomb. Just one sick person could throw an entire oasis town into chaos, turning bustling rest stops into ghost towns within weeks. But the Black Death was just the loudest whisper in a long, creepy conversation. Smallpox, measles, leprosy, and tuberculosis all hitched rides on the Silk Road, often going both ways. Cities that once welcomed caravans with open arms started rethinking things, setting up health checkpoints, quarantine zones, and sometimes just slamming the gates shut. Some merchants tried to adapt. Caravans shortened routes, stopped less, or moved at night to avoid detection. Infected goods were sometimes burned on arrival, no matter their value, but fear was still hard to shake. Stories of sudden fevers, black sores, and animal carcasses haunted campfires along the route. Still, despite the fear, trade never really stopped. The lure of money and connections was just too strong. You could say the plagues showed the Silk Road's two-faced nature. It was the biggest, deadliest circulation system the world had ever seen. Empires rose thanks to the Silk Road, but in its shadow, entire populations fell not by swords, but by breath. Camels carrying perfume and porcelain could also carry plague. The road that brought life to cities could silence them terrifyingly fast. Hidden beneath the dust of history are women who traveled, traded, ruled, and whispered along the caravan trails of the Silk Road. While chronicles often focus on emperors, merchants, and warriors, women were the silent architects of this intercontinental hustle. In caravan towns like Samarkand, Merv, and Turfan, women played crucial roles in both the economy and household life. Many shops, stalls, and tea houses were run by women, essential pit stops for merchants and travelers. These places weren't just for sleeping or eating. They were info hubs where secrets traded hands along with spices. Noble women had their influence too. In powerful Silk Road kingdoms like the Sogdian principalities or the Tang dynasty's western provinces, women often acted as diplomats, partners, and cultural bridges. A well-arranged marriage between dynasties or tribes could seal trade deals, end grudges, or open new routes. Some princesses didn't just get jewelry, they received entire caravans packed with riches spanning thousands of miles. Then, there were the trading women, especially in nomadic cultures. Among Mongol, Uyghur, and Turk tribes, women were often educated, energetic, and business savvy. They rode horses, managed assets, negotiated with foreign merchants, and made big calls on family wealth. In a society always on the move, everyone had to pull their weight, and gender lines were blurrier than in the stiff courts of stagnant empires. Women were creators too. They wove textiles that became valuable exports. Intricate patterns on silk and wool carried the marks of ancient beliefs and local traditions. Some folks even composed poems and tunes, passed from oasis to oasis, mixing languages and melodies into a cultural cocktail that stuck around long after the traders moved on. But hey, not every story is sunshine and rainbows. The Silk Road also hauled enslaved women, snatched in raids or bought at far-flung ports, traded like merchandise alongside ivory and incense. Some ended up in royal brothels, others in the local red light districts where the merchants hung out. Their names lost to history, but their sweat, suffering, and survival helped build the very fabric of Silk Road society. Rarely mentioned in history books, women were everywhere on the Silk Road, trading, guiding, healing, bargaining, and toughing it out. They were the market's chatter, the skilled hands stitching fabrics, the heart pushing caravans forward. No matter how grand, every road eventually fades away. By the 16th century, the once bustling Silk Road was falling silent, not with a bang, but a slow, inevitable fade out. Several forces converged. First up, the rise of sea trade as European powers opened up ocean routes to India and China. The long, dangerous overland trek was losing its charm fast. Why risk sandstorms and bandits when ships could haul way more stuff? Faster, cheaper, and with fewer knife fights. Silk and spices that once passed through 10 middlemen now sailed straight from port to port. Then came empires and borders. The Mongol Empire had once united vast lands across Eurasia, ushering in a golden age of Silk Road stability. But after it crumbled, new powers took the stage. The Ming Dynasty in China, the Timurids, the Ottomans, and others weren't exactly fans of free trade. Tariffs went up, the roots got thornier. Some cities sprang from war, others just withered away as caravans stopped rolling in. Religion played a part too. As the Islamic world grew more conservative and Catholic Europe more insular, cultural exchange slowed to a crawl. Suspicion replaced curiosity. The Silk Road, once a symbol of connection, became a corridor of caution. But the road never truly died. It just transformed. Old caravan routes turned into bustling market towns. Ancient trails became pilgrimage paths. Some routes morphed into trade roads within empires, still used by locals to swap wool, fruit, and pottery. Even today, the Silk Road's footprint lingers in highways and railways, crisscrossing Central Asia. Its legacy priceless. The Silk Road connected continents. It spread Buddhism to China, Islam up the mountain steppes, and paper to the west. It introduced peaches to Persia, horses to China, and the concept of zero to countless cultures. The letters in your alphabet, the designs on your rug, the spices in your kitchen all might trace back to those ancient camel caravans. More importantly, it proved humans, no matter how divided by geography or belief, always craved connection. They'd cross deserts, climb mountains, and risk their lives just to trade, chat, and understand each other. The Silk Road might not echo with camel hooves anymore, but its spirit lives on in every journey, every border crossed, and every story passed from traveler to traveler.